Welcome to the Pint Glass Football Podcast.
Pint Glass Football, part of the Radcast Network. I'm your host, Brad Fowler. What's up, PGF Nation? The NFL Draft is right around the corner, and tonight it's Mock Draft 1.0. The big question everybody's asking, where did the quarterbacks go? How many go in the first round? Well, we've got the answers. We'll tell you all 32 picks, break down the fits, the strategy, and which prospects could change the future of your favorite NFL team. But joining me, as always, of course, my co-host, Alex Higdon. Alex, what is going on?
I'm good, Brad. I'm looking at this big boy, and number 6 is already giving me a headache.
Yeah, I can't wait to talk about it, man, because I think some of these picks might surprise you guys. So let's start it off right from the top here, Alex. Number 1 pick on the board, Tennessee Titans. I think most people think it's going to be Cam Ward. I think it'll be Cam Ward as well. Now, look, I will say this real quick before we move on here. I think there is a slight chance that they could trade this pick because I don't think Cam Ward is a generational prospect. I think he's a good quarterback prospect, but there's a chance that maybe they could even trade this pick if they get the right offer. But otherwise, I think that's the pick here. Look, Will Levis didn't take that step that they really hoped he would last season, and they have a chance here to have a high-ceiling quarterback that could shift a franchise.
Yeah, there's not too much to talk about here, but I do think it does allow flexibility at that quarterback position, and perhaps they can flip Will Levis, similar to what the Patriots recently did with Joe Milton.
Somebody would absolutely take a swing on a guy like Will Levis and see if there's still a chance to develop him. At number 2, the Cleveland Browns. This is where the draft really gets interesting here because we know they could definitely go quarterback here, but I don't think they do, Alex. I think they go with Abdul Carter, the edge out of Penn State. Reports have come out. Now, look, and there's a lot of smoke screens around draft time, but it kind of feels like, from what I'm hearing, the Browns don't love Shedeur Sanders, and I think they're looking at the chance to add a guy like Abdul Carter, and they could envision a pass rush tandem could be elite.
Yeah, I agree there. I mean, I think the next year's draft is full of a lot of potential quarterbacks coming out, and I think the Browns building the defense is a good look here. I'm not mad at it at all.
Now, number 3, the New York Giants. I have them taking Shedeur Sanders, obviously the quarterback out of Colorado. A lot of people are saying that they think Shedeur Sanders could slide. I just don't see it here. Now, I think in this scenario with this mock draft, I think this could be the perfect scenario for the Giants here because Russell Wilson, I think, is more of an insurance policy just in case Cam Ward and Sanders went number 1 and number 2.
The Giants are interesting. I'll just say this for the most because these two guys, the coach and the GM, are in a final year. Like, they have to win. And it actually might be a little hard to prepare the team for the future when you need to be in a win-now mode in order for you to keep your job.
Now, before we move on, do you think, though, let's say they take Shedeur Sanders like I have here in the mock, do you think that maybe buys a little bit of time and a little bit of patience for this current regime from the ownership group if you bring in a rookie and say, look, we might only win 5 games, but if Shedeur Sanders looks like a franchise quarterback with this coaching staff, with Brian Daboll and the GM, who, by the way, had a really nice draft last year. I think there's actually some nice young pieces on this team as a side note. But if Sanders comes in and he looks like a guy to build around, does that buy you some time even if you don't win a lot of games?
I think it should. I mean, even if you wanted to make a move, perhaps that move you make on the GM side. But honestly, I would stand pat with both of these guys if you draft Shedeur. Brian Daboll has already proven himself with Josh Allen that he knows how to develop and fix any quirks and things that we've talked about Shedeur in our previous pod. I think he'd be the guy that'd be perfect for the job.
I think that could be a really nice fit here. And pairing a young quarterback with a good offensive play caller like Brian Daboll, I think could be a good fit. At number 4, the New England Patriots, I have them taking Travis Hunter, the cornerback / wide receiver out of Colorado. I just think they could use a dynamic playmaker for a guy like Drake May and another high-level corner. And I started thinking about this, Alex. Vrabel had a package of plays for the Patriots on offense back in the day, if you remember. And I think he's a guy who will appreciate the versatility of a guy like Travis Hunter. And I think he kind of falls into their lap here in this scenario at number 4.
I know we're not doing trades, so let's just preface it with that. This would probably be the first spot I think a trade would happen is here, because I think there's a lot more needs that the Patriots have, and they would benefit from moving down, perhaps picking up another first round next year, and then moving down and just getting a lot of value picks, because the value is in that 2nd through 4th round.
At number 5, the Jacksonville Jaguars. Now, this is a team that I think could go in a lot of different directions, but I think their biggest need is defensive tackle. And right here in this scenario, they could get the best one in this draft with Mason Graham out of Michigan.
This is where we're going to have our first disagreement, because Jacksonville right now is so poor at offensive line. And with what they did in investing the amount of money into the quarterback, you have to protect him. They do not have anything on this offensive line. Walker Little, Ezra Cleveland, Robert Hainsey, Patrick McCarry, and Antoine Harrison. That does not scream protection at all. Of course, anybody can be coached up, but we're talking about what's on paper. And they weren't good last year. Neither too much was Trevor Lawrence, even when he had time. Keep bringing in coaches to try and fix this guy. You're going to have to invest in the offensive line. Last year, they traded away Cam Robinson, their best offensive lineman. This is going to be a glued together offensive line of no one of value that we can say on paper right now. They have to either trade out here, or you're just going to have to take Will Campbell right now.
The only pushback I would have is this particular class. Is there an offensive lineman worthy of that selection?
Right, correct, not there. That's why I said they would either have to trade back and then pick up whoever, if it's Membo, if it's Will Campbell, or whatever they have on their draft board, you'd have to trade back here. It's just too high to then double down. You're not getting better at the key position that you keep consistently having problems at.
At number 6, your Las Vegas Raiders. I have them selecting Ashton Genty, the running back out of Boise State. I know you said you're going to have a problem with this. I think when you look at Pete Carroll and Chip Kelly coming over, I don't think it's hard to figure out that these guys want to run the ball. They want to be a run-heavy, run-first team. And you get the number 1 running back off the board here.
I'm always going to have a problem with the running back this high. This is not about the player. This is simply about what your team needs. And you keep ignoring consistently year after year after year after year, ignoring the defense. At some point, you have to go in on the defense, a Jalon Walker, or trade back, or do something different. This draft is too deep at running back to go here.
And look, once again, just to reiterate, I didn't put any trades into this mock draft. We know there's probably going to be trades, but I feel like when you're doing a mock draft, trades get really messy, and it's really hard to predict. I mean, let's face it, it's hard enough predicting who these teams are going to take. I just thought, let's keep it simple, and let's just play this out hypothetically if each team just kept their pick. But I do agree with you. I think the Raiders at 6 is a place to watch for a potential trade. At number 7, the New York Jets. I have them taking Jackson Dart, the quarterback out of Ole Miss. Now, if you guys have been listening to our recent episodes, we talked about our top 5 quarterback rankings in this class, and we discussed these guys at length. We put draft grades on all these top quarterback prospects. We don't have Jackson Dart anywhere near the top 10 as far as ranking to be drafted this high. Absolutely not. Neither one of us think that this is where he should go. However, we know that the quarterback tax is real, and we know that teams are going to overreach for a quarterback, especially teams that are desperate for one. And I think the New York Jets fit that bill. After the Aaron Rodgers experiment just went sideways, I think they're going to try to build around a rookie again. And there's a lot of buzz around this kid. And with the top 2 quarterbacks off the board in this mock draft, I think there's a realistic possibility that they could pull the trigger on Dart here, even if it's way too early.
Because this is not the strongest quarterback draft, you're going to see things like this here that you're seeing right now. And this is just one of those moments. I do not like it. I do not like it for the Jets. I would have rather them probably go in the Tyler Warren direction and then maybe go after a quarterback next year.
Yeah, if it's not there for the Jets, I do think there's a realistic chance that he still gets picked in the first round. Even if, let's say he slides in this draft and all of a sudden he's available in the mid to late 20s, I think someone at that point, Pittsburgh is a team to watch, certainly, but I also think if he falls past them and kind of gets into that mid 20 range, I think there is a chance that a team trades back into the first round to get him because we know how valuable that fifth-year option can be for first-round quarterbacks. At number 8, the Carolina Panthers, I have them taking Tyler Warren. You mentioned that is another spot the Jets could be looking for a guy like Tyler Warren. Possibly they have a need at tight end. But I think this makes a lot of sense if Tyler Warren is available at 8 for the Panthers, because Warren is just such an intriguing weapon for a guy like Bryce Young, who really showed some promise last year.
So I'm going to say this right now. If this were to happen, this would be the best draft pick of anybody in the first round of your mock draft, or I could probably say of any draft. You want to talk about a quarterback who reinvented himself after the horrible first year that he had and came in that second half and looked like the quarterback they thought that they drafted. And you're telling me he has Xavier Leggett, Adam Thielen, and he has a strong running game with the running back room that he has. And now you're going to tell me you're going to give him the best tight end in the draft, who's probably a step below where Brock Bowers was as a prospect coming in last year. This is magic, and I would start placing some heavy bets on Bryce Young to have an incredible year.
Now, at number 9, the New Orleans Saints. This was a tough one for me, Alex. I'm not going to lie. This is one of those teams I had a really hard time deciding where to go here with this pick, because this is a team that has a lot of roster building in front of them, and I think that they could really go multiple directions here. So I think at this point, it's best player available, and I think Jalen Walker, the linebacker out of Georgia, makes sense and also helps them out on that defense, a guy that you can kind of move around like a chess piece.
Jalen Walker is a leader amongst leaders, as he was there at Georgia. You're talking about an older Demario Davis. If we just want to talk about the middle linebacker position, as you said, he can move around, who's on his way out in terms of, being the great player that he was. And Cam Jordan, insert Jalen Walker, who will be trained by the best in Cam Jordan and Demario Davis, how to be the leader of the team when they leave in the next year or so.
At number 10, the Chicago Bears. I have them taking Michael Williams, the edge defender out of Georgia. Look, this is higher than I would take Williams, but we know this guy's getting a lot of buzz in the pre-draft process here, so it wouldn't shock me if he ends up being in this range. The Bears really addressed offensive line in free agency. And so I could definitely see them going D-line here in the draft, because they were 24th in the NFL in pass rush win rate last year. This is a guy that could help boost that for them.
I'm not big on Michael Williams, but I think if you put him on the line that now has Grady Jarrett to go along with Montez Sweat, he gets to see a lot of one-on-ones and can probably do his job, since the attention is going to be on those two guys. So not a bad pick.
At number 11, the San Francisco 49ers. I have them taking Armand Mimbo, the offensive tackle out of Missouri. Now, this is a team that, as good as this roster's been the last couple of years, it's starting to age and actually has a few more holes and could go in different direction here. There's definitely a few different ways this team could go with this pick. It might be one of those situations where it's best player available, but this pick, I think, really fits because, look, they're working on a long-term deal right now for Brock Purdy. So he's the guy you're going to build around. I think you've got to protect him. This is also a guy that just kind of feels like a 49er offensive lineman type.
Yeah, and I think even if it's not this player, I believe that it would be any other player at offensive line here. So I completely understand that the only place they could go here is cornerback.
At number 12, the Dallas Cowboys. I have them taking Matthew Golden, the wide receiver out of Texas. Look, this is a spot where I could see them possibly taking Omarion Hampton out of UNC, a guy that we're both really high on, maybe the best running back in this class. But I think they could go Golden here and really pair him up with CeeDee Lamb, because outside of Lamb, this team really lacks weapons on the outside. And look, they paid Dak Prescott. I think you've got to get him a legit wide receiver to play alongside Lamb.
Yeah, when Dak has his guys now, we don't know about the coaching, but when he's had his, a full array of weapons, he's shown that he can be a top 10 quarterback in this league. So Matthew Golden, a guy that you'll be able to switch inside and out because he can play the X, the Y, or the Z. And they love to slide CD inside sometimes. So I think this would Give them some more weaponry, some big play, explosive plays out of this guy who runs a 4.35, I believe, in 40.
At number 13, the Miami Dolphins. I have them taking Will Campbell, the offensive tackle out of LSU. Now, we talked about it on one of our recent episodes. He might actually be a guard. The shorter arms is definitely a concern, but the one thing about this guy is you have to love the tape because the guy is a big-time player. He's smart, he's tough, he's athletic, and has good feet. I think this is just one of those value picks right here where arguably the best tackle is available. Maybe the best offensive lineman, I should just say, is available. And this was one of the worst pass blocking teams in the NFL last year. Like I just mentioned a minute ago with Dak, you paid Tua, so now you got to protect him.
Yeah, they need help on the offensive line, so great pick.
At number 14, the Indianapolis Colts. I have them taking Colston Loveland, the tight end out of Michigan. He's really high on a lot of people's draft boards, and I get why. I mean, he's got a lot of talent. I think he's a guy that can be a difference maker right out of the gate. And I think this year is a really important year to find out if Anthony Richardson is the guy moving forward. And so why not get him a big target to help find out?
Well, if this was a big year for Anthony Richardson, they should have traded up and drafted Matthew Golden, as far as I'm concerned, because all he does great right now is throw the deep ball. Getting Colston Loveland, I think, will be great for Daniel Jones, who will end up starting, because one thing Anthony Richardson can't do is throw the 10 to 20 yard intermediate play that you need to complete in this league in order to succeed. So we'll see Daniel Jones, and this will be a great pick for Daniel Jones.
You have zero faith in AR-15.
Yeah. Nope, not at all. Nope. He needs work. This is not the league to get caught up in. This is the league for what's going on and things start to slow down. Right now, he's on the Autobahn and doesn't know how to get off, driving in the fast lane.
Yeah, no, I'm not saying I'm betting on him to take that step, but I think this is the last year where they have to find out, okay, can we build around this guy? I think this is the year where he has to take that big step if he's going to be the guy. Now, I'm not saying he is, but they want to find out this year. I think because of that, I could see them going with some big playmaker here, and I think Loveland. At number 15, the Atlanta Falcons, I have them taking Mike Green, the edge out of Marshall. This is a team that was 31st in sacks last year. This is a team that cannot keep ignoring a glaring hole, which is the pass rush. Look, Mike Green led the nation with 17 sacks last year. To me, I think this is where they have to go.
I'm still shocked and don't understand why they let go of Grady Jarrett, their best pass rusher and one of the best interior pass rushers, probably top 7 interior pass rushers in this league. So Mike Green, if they're going to run that 3-4 and have him on the outside, they drafted a guy last year, Braylon Treese. Maybe those guys can finally come together. But without what they have on the line, what they had last year, it'll be interesting to see how these guys are able to get off without that interior push.
At number 16, the Arizona Cardinals. I think there's multiple directions they could go here, but I ended up going with Jahad Campbell, the linebacker out of Alabama. I just think Campbell is a guy that would be able to impact multiple parts of their defense, and I think they could use somebody like that for this team.
The guy that you have coming up is a guy that I probably would have drafted in this spot right here, because they do need some semblance of a pass rush. We know they drafted Darius Robinson last year. I know he had a lot of injuries. We have to see what's going on there. And they picked up Josh Sweat. But I really would have liked to have seen the guy you have with your next pick going here.
17 overall, I've got the Cincinnati Bengals taking Shamar Stewart, the edge out of Texas A&M. Stewart is a guy that just has big-time upside, and I think he's a guy that could become a big-time producer. Now, he's a boomer bust prospect for sure, but I think with the Bengals and that defense, they'll take a big swing to try to help that defensive front.
They double and tripled down on the offense with Gesicki, Chase, and Higgins. And now you bring in now defensive help. We've talked about it before. This entire Cincinnati draft should be all defense.
At number 18, the Seattle Seahawks. I have them taking Gray Zabel, the offensive guard out of North Dakota State. Look, guard is probably their biggest hole. And so I think this is a spot where this could really fill a need for them, because here they got a chance at 18 to get the top guard in this class.
I paused for a moment because I was thinking about that defense and thinking about what they have. boy James Pierce would look incredible here as an outside rusher, but I can't disagree with you there. You brought in Sam Darnold, and one thing that Sam Darnold needs is protection.
At number 19, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, I have them drafting Donovan Ezeriku. I probably butchered that name, but he's the edge defender out of Boston College. 16 and a half sacks last season. He's a guy that's been climbing draft boards this offseason because really he's one of the most talented pass rushers in this draft. He didn't play at an Ohio State. He didn't play at Michigan, Oregon, Texas. So a lot of people nationally, he flew under the radar at Boston College, but man, he's a big time player, Alex.
Yeah, you get no complaints from me here. You brought in Hassan Reddick, and now you're going to put this guy on the other side with Vita Vea and Kalaji Kancey in the front. Yeah, he's going to see a lot of single coverage and do what he did at Boston College at this level.
At number 20, I have the Denver Broncos taking Omarion Hampton, the running back out of North Carolina. And I think this could be a really home run pick for them because last season they only averaged 4.1 yards per carry. It was one of the worst in the league. I think you bring in a guy like this and help your young quarterback with that run game.
Now, this is interesting because everybody knows my narrative on Sean Payton. He doesn't run the ball. And to take a running back here would be very interesting. So if he takes him, he does fit because he's a 3-down back and he can catch out of the backfield and has some explosiveness to his games. So this would be a very interesting pick.
At 21, the Pittsburgh Steelers, I have them drafting Derek Harmon, the defensive tackle out of Oregon. And this is another team that I think could go in a couple different directions, but I think this pick makes sense because Cameron Hayward, even though he's still playing at a high level, he's going to turn 36 this offseason, and that's going to be a hole that they're going to need to address sooner than later.
No problem with the position, just a problem with the player. If we could flip-flop what we're about to talk about next, this would be perfect because I think he's a better fit and the attitude for that Pittsburgh defense.
Yeah, at number 22, the Los Angeles Chargers, I have them taking Kenneth Grant, the defensive tackle out of Michigan, and for me, this is the Harbaugh connection from Michigan. Obviously, a guy that played under Harbaugh. You know, Jim Harbaugh is a guy that believes in building up front first. And so year 2 with the Chargers, I think he's going to continue that trend. And with Kenneth Grant, I think the value is tremendous, and he knows this guy well, so he'll know exactly what he's getting with Kenneth Grant.
Yeah, no complaint here. Perfect fit.
At number 23 overall, the Green Bay Packers, I have them taking Maxwell Hairston, the cornerback out of Kentucky. I think cornerback needs to be addressed here. And this is a guy that is climbing draft boards after that combine. I think he fits that Packers defense as well.
I think Green Bay, there's a few different places they could go to on offense here, but you can never have enough cornerback specifically when you're going to be seeing that what's going on there in Chicago and what they have in Detroit.
Now at 24, their NFC North rival, the Minnesota Vikings, I have them taking Nick Amanawari, the safety out of South Carolina. Harrison Smith is going into year 14. So I think it's time to start thinking about his replacement, and you could get maybe the top safety in this class at 24. I think it's a great value pick as well.
Right position, wrong player. I do not like him at all. I think he's just been a workout warrior because when I cut on the tape, this guy is scared to tackle. And if anybody knows anything about Brian Flores and his coaching style, he will not like a player like this that will not tackle. Of course, you can always coach somebody up. We're simply looking at the prospect and what he's done in college. But the problem is he's not a tackler. I have to go Malachi Starks here.
At 25, the Houston Texans, I have them taking Josh Simmons, the offensive tackle out of Ohio State. There's a couple different tackles still available on the board at this point. I think Josh Connerly out of Oregon is another guy that could possibly go here, but I have them taking Josh Simmons. Houston traded away its best offensive lineman, left tackle Laramie Tunzel, and this is a team that gave up 54 sacks last year. This is a huge need for them, and I think they'll address it here.
You can really pencil in whichever offensive lineman you feel is the best at a lot of these offensive lines. They're very close together, so yeah, no problem here.
At 26, the LA Rams, I have them taking Jahdae Barron, the cornerback out of Texas. Barron, I think, is a guy who would strengthen this Rams pass defense, and this pass defense really struggled. They gave up 29 passing touchdowns last year, so I think adding a guy like this, a versatile playmaker in that secondary, would be huge for them at 26.
Right, they definitely needed a playmaker in the secondary, especially what they have up front now that is wreaking havoc. You need a ball hawking guy back there, and he's my number one DB on the board, so perfect fit.
At 27, the Baltimore Ravens, I have them selecting James Pierce Jr., the edge defender out of Tennessee. Alex, this scenario played out exactly how you dreamed it would. You said, James Pierce, imagine him falling to the Baltimore Ravens. You mentioned that on a recent podcast. Well, when I started doing the mock, I think it's a realistic possibility here. Too many big plays downfield last year for the Baltimore Ravens. I think you help solve it with more pass rush.
Outside of Tyler Warren, this might be the second best pick of the draft because he falls right in place. Whatever issues that we keep hearing about, but we don't know what the actual things are, he goes to a place with Ozzie Newsome that has structure, that can bring in a Ray Lewis, that can bring in a Terrell Suggs, that can mentor this kid and get him on the right track.
Now, at 28, the Detroit Lions, I have them taking Nick Scordon, the edge out of Texas A&M. I think the Lions' biggest question mark last season was who would step up at the other edge spot. So I think right now this would be a situation where you could get a high upside guy late in the draft here to try to pair with Aiden Hutchinson.
Yeah, so you're going to have Aiden Hutchinson that has a big engine, and then you're going to bring another guy in that has another engine. So you have two engines that don't stop on one team. That's great for the Lions defense.
At 29, the Washington Commanders, I have them taking Will Johnson, the cornerback out of Michigan, a guy that I really like this guy's tape. I think the 40 time may cause him to slide in this draft. I could see him sliding to the back half of this draft, and the Washington Commanders could find great value at 29, taking a guy like Will Johnson, because I think cornerback is still a big-time weak spot on this roster.
I think they may or may not be sure about the continue on with Marshawn Lattimore, so you get a guy in here that can learn and be part of this young growing team.
At number 30, the Buffalo Bills, I have them taking a corner as well, and that's Florida State corner Azareye'h Thomas. I think they should be looking at cornerback in this draft. I think it was a glaring hole for this team, maybe the weakest spot of this team last year, a team that gave up a lot of big plays downfield. They have to address this position. I think you get a guy with a lot of juice in Thomas coming out of Florida State.
A lot of people may see it as a reach. There's not a lot of quote-unquote high-ranking DBs for the first round. This is now the fourth one after the three we talked about previously, but their defensive backfield is horrendous, and they need to inject some youth there.
At 31, the Kansas City Chiefs, I have them taking Kelvin Banks Jr., the offensive tackle out of Texas. Look, this is just a spot where you're getting good value with Kelvin Banks, a good player who slides to the back end of this first round. Kansas City absolutely has to address Patrick Mahomes' protection up front. It got completely exposed in that Super Bowl. Now it's gotten even weaker this offseason. So I don't think there's any doubt where they need to go early in this draft.
Here's another place that I might not feel exactly the same way that you feel. I think the Chiefs here, they could surprise you, and they'll go offense, but I think they may go in the weaponry department, because as we get closer and closer to the end of this, and our listeners will start to notice there isn't a name that we've called, I wouldn't be surprised if this perhaps may be a T-Mac call, depending on how I feel about him. But when anybody gets in that Andy Reid offense, we know they seem to turn into Superman. So I wouldn't be surprised if they took him or if they took Travion Henderson here as another weapon.
At number 32, the Philadelphia Eagles, to finish this mock draft, Alex, I have them taking Walter Nolan, the defensive tackle out of Ole Miss, and another team that I think would have tremendous value if they had a guy like this available at 32. Howie Roseman has historically favored offensive and defensive linemen on day one of the draft, and we know how much he loves those big SEC defensive tackles. I think Walter Nolan fits what they like to do.
Yeah, I can see this. I think they could go in perhaps another direction as well, but I'm not mad at this pick. And then you just replace Milton Williams, who was a guy that they moved on from in free agency, and then looming next year, or actually over this summer, and then next year is what do they do with Jordan Davis, and how do they pay all these guys? And this may be an indication of the direction they're going for in terms of him.
Look, guys, if you enjoyed the podcast, do us a favor and subscribe, rate and review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. And guys, later this week, our next episode, we're going to discuss our top 5 running backs and our top 5 edge players in this draft. It's going to be exclusively on YouTube, so be sure to go over there and subscribe if you haven't already. Once again, I'm Brad Fowler. He's Alex Higdon. This is Pint Glass Football, and we'll catch you next time.
Thanks for listening to the Pint Glass Football Podcast. Be sure to subscribe and follow us on Twitter at PGF Podcast.